Is that too bad? Is that natural? Do you think it's just a function of that particular age, you know, whether it's, you know, early teen age where there's so much of a sense of being a girl or being a boy? What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting, and you're probably right about that. In fact, I was thinking about writing a book that would involve my great-grandfather, who was a very interesting character. And my husband said to me the other day, yeah, well, that's a boy's book. It's got bears, it's got rifles, it's got... It does seem that there really is very little crossover. I'm not quite sure why that is. I'd love to be able to write a book that was universally, of universal intrigue. I think that would be the great thing, you know, that it's gender.
Well, the Harry Potter books did do that.
They did do that. I'm sure you would find a lot more young ladies that are reading them. In the end of the day, just because young ladies do tend to read a lot more. But I guess what I'm saying is, and I have a small sample, the young men that I've worked with who are aspiring writers tend to say, I'm reading War and Peace right now, I'm reading Ayn Rand, I'm reading Faulkner, I've just finished The Sun Also Rises. When they get together in their book clubs, they seem to choose the classics. And so when I recommend to them, I recommend, for example, Out Stealing Horses by Per Peterson, which is one of my favorite books, a relatively new book, but perfect for a young adult. Written for an adult, but there's a young man at its heart. Men and women should love that book. They do. So I don't know all of the trends, and I don't know as many readers as I should, but it's just what I discover as I walk through life.
That's interesting, that the idea that the boys tend to gravitate toward the classics.
Just what they talk to me about. And again, I have a small sample, but when I'm interacting with young ladies who are reading, they're reading what's being published right now, often for young adults. When I'm interacting with the young men, they're often saying, have you read, or can you suggest to me, or I just was recommending, for example, Colum McCann to a young man who's written Zoli and other fantastic books for adults. It's just, you know the student, and you know what's right for them, and
Interesting. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about another book of yours called Flow, The Life and Times of Philadelphia's Schuylkill River. And that's a very unorthodox book, unusual book. Could you tell us a little bit about the style of the book and what inspired you to write it that way?
Before I wrote Flow, I had published 5 memoirs, and I still was very interested in the I voice, but not interested in any story that I might tell. I am a Philadelphian. I consider myself to be a Philadelphian. I was working through my business with a lot of civic leaders who were excited about the Renaissance that the Schuylkill was undergoing. And I began to research the river. I'd walked over it every day. I went to Penn, and I would walk from Penn to South Street and back. And so I felt I knew her, and I felt I'd watched her. And I was interested, as a woman my age, in a story of a creature who could never die. And I felt that she was now in perpetual middle age. I was interested in what she'd gone through. She was seductive and powerful when she was pristine, and she was tormented and confused and bewildered when she, the population began to encroach. She was sullied and ruined at one point with all the pollution. She was depressed and despairing, and then she was asked to hope. And through,
quite a trajectory of anthropomorphizing.
Yes, it is such a thin book too.
Yeah.
It's so small for all that to happen. But so you asked, what is the book? I don't believe it can be, or has been yet. It's not really prose poetry. It's not straight history. Of course, running across the top are distillations of emotions that the river feels. It's her first person. Running below are the historic captions. They root the river's experience and the reader's experience in Philadelphia history. It's deeply footnoted, and there's a great bibliography, so it's also a book that Philadelphians now are turning to for sort of research and unexpected information on the city. Was it an easy book to sell? No. Poetry houses weren't interested. It's not really poetry. It's not a novel. It's not a children's book. What is this? I called Micah Clyte, who I didn't know, at Temple University, and I said, I know you do regional books. Would you be interested in this? And he said, well, what is this? And I said, well, it's And I tried to explain it. And about a week later, he said, we have actually no idea what this is, and therefore we're going to publish it. And it's actually gotten one of the best receptions of any book I've ever done. A book that, I mean, it wasn't even sent to PW or Library Journal or any of those places for review, but Gary Kramer at Temple University did such a job of telling Philadelphia about the book, and it's proven to give me such entree. I'm now working, for example, with Sam Katz on his documentary film project that he's working. I and a number of people are working with him, but I've had the chance to really get to know.
Google?
No, he's doing a whole documentary film, a la Ken Burns, but on Philadelphia.
Okay.
He's been working on that, and so this book has given me a chance to get to know really interesting people and to talk about interesting things. And I am very interested in place in my books. And my third memoir, for example, was about El Salvador, my husband's home. This Flow is about the river and
Tell me about this 5 memoirs. I mean, you
Well,
seem like a pretty young person
yes,
to have written 5
I'm not
memoirs.
as presumptuous as that makes me sound.
Yeah.
I actually am not, I've never written a memoir because I am interesting. I've written a memoir because if you do it right, memoir affords you the opportunity to approach big universal themes through the lens of the eye of the singular. My first book was about, I wrote about my child, about friendship, about marriage. For example, each one answers a question. For the third one, Still Love in Strange Places, the question is, how well can we ever really know the people we love? And my husband being Salvadoran, that takes me then to a history of a country, to his coffee farm, to his growing up, to who he is in Spanish versus who he is in English. And it is a relationship story as much as it is an exploration of the history of coffee and everything else. So the fourth was called Seeing Passé, and it was about the role of imagination. I have a child who I love very much, and I was watching all of my peers raise their children in sort of competitive fashion, and I was thinking, well, I'm giving Jeremy a lot of room to daydream, and bringing kids into the house to talk about writing, not in a competitive way. No one got a grade, it didn't go on the resume. But I was very interested in talking about how important the imagination is. That book is full of writing exercises that we did. And the fifth memoir is Ghosts in the Garden. It's about coming to terms with middle age while walking one particular garden for a 2-year period, and what I learned about trees and seeds and yielding and sky and weather from the gardeners there while I'm thinking about my own role. So you actually could read 5 Beth Kephart memoirs and not know very much about her.
Really? Well, that must mean that you need to write 5 more memoirs.
That's all that anybody should ever know.
Now, what is your son? You have a teenage son, you said?
I have a wonderful son who's actually a freshman in college now.
Okay. And what does he think? Does he read your young adult books?
He reads, I read parts of them out loud to him when I'm trying to get dialogue right. He's my muse, and he's gone now. I don't know if I'll write again. But he is got a tremendous ear for dialogue and would always know if something didn't sound like it might be said at a locker. Although Undercover is set, in a slightly, probably the 70s, 80s. I try to make them not so clear when they are set, so they're sort of timeless. There's no gadgetry, there's no brand in any of the books that I write. Unlike Gossip Girls and so many where brand rules, you won't find brand in my books.
So you try and make it universal.
I do.
And sort of timeless.
Yes, I do.
Now, what about this new, you have a new book, Nothing But Ghosts?
Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about
It's coming
that?
out it's coming out in June, and it is, in summary, the story of a young girl who's just lost her mother. She's an only child. Her father's an art restorer. An interesting painting comes to the house. And at the same time, she's working in a garden, and there's a recluse that's living there, and she's trying to resolve the mystery of women who disappear, her mother and this recluse. So it is a mystery. Things have to be resolved, but it's also a love story, love for a mother, the willingness to let the mother go, but also the embrace of a different kind of community that Katie, meets on the cusp of her senior year.
Yeah, I found out about your book on your new book on your website. You have a fairly elaborate website, and I guess that's part of your writing life, is keeping that up to date. I mean, that must in itself take a good deal of time. Do you feel that as a writer you have to have now a website? Is that an important component of your exchange with your readers and your audience?
I love that. Blog does take an enormous amount of time because I'm doing photography and writing, and I'm always looking for that match.
Yeah, it's a very varied site. There's lots going on it.
Yeah, the everyday entry is really always just one photograph and one body of text that somehow relates to the photograph. It is a puzzle that I solve every morning at 5 or so when I get to do it. And it keeps me intellectually awake. I've been amazed by the conversations that it has started and the friendships that I've made and kept through it, and I feel very grateful for those. Is it necessary? It's just part of me.
How long has it been in existence?
A year, exactly a year.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You're also a ballroom dancer?
I ballroom dance, yes.
I guess I shouldn't say a ballroom dancer, but you like to ballroom
dance,
I do.
Which
I guess goes along with the subject matter of the 2 books that I read, the idea of movement and performance and so forth. Tell us about, where do you do this? What do you like about ballroom dancing? It is, obviously it's very popular right now. Yeah. Have you been doing it for a long time?
I've been doing it for about 2.5 years. I'll never wear one of the dresses that they wear on Dancing with the Stars. I just want to make that.
Do you do it competitively?
And I do showcase sorts of things. I happen to dance in a studio with extraordinarily talented people. They're very smart. Dancers are very smart. It's a whole nother language. And it is the 2 or 3 hours a week where I am not thinking about anything, any client problem or any book problem. It is in that way expansive. I'll never get anything precisely right. So it's a source of endless frustration, but also just it's keeping me alive in an important way. I run a business, I write these books, I live a somewhat solitary life. The community of dancers that I know, I could tell you about each one. One's a nationally ranked person, but a very well-known dermatologist. You go on and on and on. There's a couple that's teaching me now. They're married. They're from Belarus. I'm learning all about their culture. They're well-known champions, and beautiful together. And they are ushering me into a way of understanding my body and movement that's new to me.
That's interesting. So tell us, because we're running out of time here, your next project, have you got something in mind? Have you got something launched? What are you working on?
In February 2010, the 4th young adult novel will come out, and it's called The Heart Is Not a Size. It's written, it takes place in Juarez, and it's about a group of young people who go to a squatter's village and try to make a difference there. There's a lot that goes on. I've written a novel that may or may not be for adults that is about a single day, actually 4 hours or so, in Philadelphia in 1876. I have a short story coming out in a Harper anthology in the spring of 2009, and I'm not sure beyond that what I'll be doing.
It sounds like you're very productive.
But right now I don't have anything I'm writing. So.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Beth Kephart, for being with us today.
It was a great conversation. I appreciate your questions.
Okay, and thank you for joining us today at the Drexel interview.